Our guest is Ethan Yang. He's an editorial associate at the American Institute for Economic Research. This is further to the point I made yesterday in reading the piece, I believe you pronounce her name, Janine Eunice, on how the lockdowns are ineffective. Not only do they cause lots of problems, suicides and domestic assault, drug overdoses and alcohol overdoses, and economic misery, but they don't actually slow the spread in the long term of the virus. That's her findings. Further to that point, our guest Ethan Yang talking about an article that he's written, a closer look at the states that stayed open. And folks, this is why federalism is so important. When we have 50 different laboratories where we can experiment with higher taxes, lower taxes, tort reform, different ways to do insurance instead of one national approach, then we can then study the results and get data the way you do with science. It's like we're conducting 50 different experiments. So he has done that with a closer look at the states that stayed open, the 7 states, Utah, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Wyoming, and Arkansas, that did not issue lockdown orders. Ethan, first of all, why did you have the idea to do that? What was your thinking?
Mm-hmm. It's definitely what you just mentioned, federalism. It's so important. Like you said, we have 50 different laboratories of democracy. And I think it's really important to look at what happened. You know, we have all these states that issued different orders in different types of fashions. And we also have 7 states, which you just mentioned, that didn't. And I think it's really important to look at what went down in those states, how the economies fared, the deaths per capita. And also in previous work, I've looked at other countries, you know, that really further this idea of treating it like a science experiment, looking around, seeing what's going on, how do these policies play out. And the results are for everyone to read. You know, I'm not making any huge assumptions or really big conclusions. I'm just writing what happened. You know, I have my own personal biases, of course, but, you know, I just want to present the findings, and it's out there for the public to read. And I think it's really important that we consider these facts.
And what are those findings? What did you find from the 7 states? What was consistent across the 7 states vis-a-vis the other 43 who did at some point lock down?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. And the results are quite telling. So I think the context was that we were told from the White House, Dr. Fauci, as well as the various other advisors, that we needed a national stay-at-home order, right? Dr. Fauci was recorded saying that he doesn't really understand why all these other states haven't issued these stay-at-home orders, which are things considering essential versus non-essential business dichotomies, shelter-in-place orders. You know, all these very draconian policies that you just mentioned have been leading to these terrible consequences while not actually mitigating COVID-19. So I decided to take a look, and I looked at the states, and obviously the prompt is every state should have locked down. So I want to just look at that and see if it was true, look at the data. And yeah, what we found is that that's definitely not what all the states have done. We should not issue a national stay-at-home order. So what happened was one of these states is an outlier, I will admit that. But 6 out of 7 of these states are at the very lowest portion of deaths per capita. Not deaths total, because I know deaths total can be a little misleading when you don't factor in, you know, death per capita. But per capita, you know, adjusted per 100,000 heads per population, states like Utah, South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, Arkansas are at the very bottom. You know, they're doing the best when it comes to mitigating deaths per capita, which I think is, you know, if we're going to talk about saving lives, they're doing it without a lockdown, without issuing all these various draconian orders. The only outlier is Iowa. Iowa is still doing better than most of the country, but is more in the lower mid-pack, right? So the 6 other states are basically the gold standard. Like, they're at the very bottom, like in very few deaths. Iowa is kind of like in the middle, but still on the bottom portion, right? So Iowa, I like to mention them. I think it's really important that we point out that Iowa, even though it did not issue these formal lockdown orders, they still were a little more heavy-handed with the government policy. They still issued a lot of different regulations, but they just didn't go that full step to a stay-at-home order. So that's why I still included Iowa. But yeah, the results are telling. We have lower deaths per capita, but we also, and the economies, this is also another important thing. Utah has I think it was like a 4.8% unemployment rate. in July, that's practically full employment versus states like Massachusetts, California, New Jersey, New York, places with these really heavy-handed lockdown policies are experiencing double-digit unemployment rates, like near 20%. Like that's absolutely catastrophic. So I think in terms of not only mitigating deaths, but protecting economies and keeping people's livelihoods in place, these 7 states, for the most part, have succeeded in doing that.
So what about the results? Do you think that if we could get people to really dig into the data and see the results, what about them really speaks to you in terms of, well, we can't undo the overreaction, if in fact it was an overreaction in your opinion, but what can we learn from it for the next time?
Mm-hmm. So I think this is actually a really interesting thing. My colleagues at AIER are a lot more well-versed in the history than I am, but I can generally summarize their points, is that this lockdown policy that the world has embraced so quickly is not based in any real historical evidence. According to my colleagues, it's really started around 2006 when George W. Bush was having a team of epidemiologists at the White House, and they were like talking about these new experimental ideas. And prior to that, this idea of just locking down states, like full-on states, has never really been tried. Like in the past, we've done isolated, very small quarantines, like certain blocks, certain counties, like that makes sense. Like if there's like an outbreak in a certain district, maybe it might make sense to lock down that district. But issuing a full-on stay-at-home order, closing down business across the board, whether it's small counties, large counties, Los Angeles, or Fresno, or like the middle of South Dakota, it doesn't matter like where you are or what the demographics are of your area. Like everyone's getting the same treatment. That really has no precedent in history when it comes to policy, and it also just flies in the face of everything that we believe in. Like like you said, we believe in federalism. We believe in limited government. We believe in you are innocent until proven guilty. Like this is the biggest thing for me, is like we've assumed that people need to prove that they shouldn't lock down instead of proving that they need to lock down, right? So we've flipped the burden of evidence on its head, and now individual citizens now need to prove that they should be out versus the government having to prove that they have to take action. So I think we've just done everything wrong. There's absolutely no precedent in all of this, and I think the results speak for themselves. We deviated from what we know works, and we paid for it.
And that's the great frustration, is yes, we've paid for it. There's been immense suffering. There will be for decades. They're predicting at least a decade for our economy to recover. Dreams dashed, businesses closed, lives lost due to lockdown, not the pandemic. And you wonder, did we really learn what we should learn from this? Ethan Yang with AIER. We'll have you back. You're a great guest. I love your wonky approach to issues that affect all of our lives. Thanks for being our guest.
Thanks for having me, Michael.